Right, thanks, Megan, and welcome to the Vantage Resilience series, where we'll be discussing strategies on making businesses stronger, more resilient. Well, have you stepped up as a leader in the face of COVID-19 as social distancing restrictions begin to ease? What will our future lives look like? How will it be different for business? A lot of uncertainty still ahead of us. So how do leaders step up and inspire their teams when they themselves don't have all the answers? So today we're going to be joined by William Gooderson. He's a retired British Army major, combat experience, leading large, high-performing teams in complex environments. And he brings his leadership learnings from the battlefield into the boardroom and leverages his insights on what makes a good leader in times of both crisis and stability. He's worked for federal and state government, public and private enterprise, and really refined his battlefield learnings to provide effective leadership training for workplace leaders. So welcome, William. So what we're going to do, we're going to start off actually with a poll to get things going, and the poll will pop up on your screen now. And we'd just like to get a pulse of where everyone is at. So the question is, are you happy with how you've handled COVID-19 as a leader? So we'll leave that open for about 30 seconds. So if you can jump on and just, it's a yes, no, maybe type question. But yeah, that's certainly would have tested a lot of resilience over the last, well, this is week 7 really of isolation. So we'll just leave that open, and Megan will provide the results shortly. But what we might do in the interim is, and we can get the results of that when they come in shortly. But
yeah, so we've just got 80% of people have voted so far. So we'll probably just give you another 10 seconds or so for any stragglers. All right, we'll close it off there. So as for the results, 84% of you are happy with how you've handled COVID-19 as a leader, which is fantastic. 4% of you are not happy with how you've handled it as a leader, and 12% of you don't think that question's applicable because you don't view yourself as a leader. As a leader.
Okay, we've got a lot of great leaders out there. So William, right now, what would you want to think about as a leader?
I think, Kev, just to pick up on the poll, it's interesting those who don't see themselves as leaders. I think one of the challenges that you will always need to acknowledge, no matter what you do, someone will always look up to you, and someone will always watch what it is you are doing. Whilst you may not have the leadership title, I think it's very keen to remember that you are always an influence to someone, be it in a personal or professional sense. So I think that we all have an element of leadership in us. I'm going to say that as a leadership coach, but I think it's very true. And for those who may not feel that they are, I would just challenge them to reflect on that and see whether or not there are those who they work with who may look up to them or who they may inspire. But to pick up on your question, I think one of the key things that we need to look at now, which is an ongoing thing, and it's the well-being of our people. It's the biggest thing. What makes you a leader is the fact that you are inspiring and leading others. And so I think it's very important to reflect on how our people are doing and making sure we bear that in mind. I know that having led large teams, so just to pick up on your earlier point, the largest I had was just shy of 1,000 at the age of 27. And that was on combat operations in Afghanistan and 8 different nationalities, a variety of different experiences and knowledge. And one of the things that was very challenging was making sure that you can actually have a good idea of how your people were feeling, because they will drive how your business or how your work is going to perform. Because if they are struggling, then your overall performance will struggle. And this is, I think, a real key thing to be aware of. So having your team's well-being at the front of mind. You may not be able to touch everybody in your team. You may not be able to get the feel of those who are right at the bottom of the organisation or in the far-flung reaches of either Australia or globally, acknowledging the workforces we have these days. This is where you lean on those who do have that insight, having your leadership teams around you, having those you trust, actually providing you that feedback and giving you the opportunity. So I think that's always front of mind for myself. But moving on, you then have the business contingency. How is the business reacting? How are we looking at this? Because there are lots of challenges of being thrown up, and you may get some insights from your team. You may yourself know what it is that's really impacting you, and how are you then going to react to that? Is it going to be innovating? Is it going to be how you're going to adapt your business or how you deliver your services? Is it understanding or looking at how your clients are going to be reacting? There's lots of industry insights going on at the moment, and I think it's very good to try and tap into those. For those who have signed up to the Strategy Anns and the HBRs and the Forbes Insights, there's some great stuff there, but there's lots of other thought leadership going around as to the challenges that are being faced. So don't be afraid to reach into that as a leader, and see what is going on, so that you can be thinking about how you want to respond and how you want to share that with your teams. I think that culture is always a challenge, and I think that particularly in a time like this where you may not have the opportunity to impact it or see how it is going as much, is one of those things that you need to have at the front of your mind or be thinking about, because it will determine how well your people are reacting through this. So thinking about what's going to be happening moving forward is a challenge, and what that culture is going to have as an impact. Is it good? Is it bad? Has it changed? When was the last time you asked your team how they're feeling? I think that's really critical at a time like that. And it leads into this final point as to the strategy. I think we need, as leaders, to be thinking about what our strategy is, what are our next steps, and where do we want to go from there.
Yeah, you mentioned reflecting, and I guess that's a very important part of improving anyone's performance, is reflecting on how you've went. And I mean, we all haven't done perfectly over the last 7 weeks. So when should we start that reflection process, like an honest reflection on what has and hasn't gone well since COVID-19?
It's a real challenging one, and I think that through the years of coaching that I've had, one of the first questions I always like to ask people is, how often do you reflect on your own performance? Or when was the last time that you took time to reflect on how you have gone? And it could be personal situation, a professional situation. It doesn't have to always be work related, but when was the last time that you actually took some time out to reflect? And the reality is 9 times out of 10, people often say, oh, I can't remember. And I think that kind of answers the question that we're not doing it enough. And my honest answer is we need to start reflecting now. You as an individual will always know how well something has gone straight after that event, because it's a natural thing. You see it in sports, you see it whenever you're performing from a business. If you've been out and you've pitched some work to a client, you will know the moment that you've finished that pitch how the work has gone and how well you've done, because you're living the moment. So capturing that reflection is critical, because if you don't, what will happen is 2 weeks later, someone will say, hey, how did that pitch go? And your view will be, it went well. What were the details? I can't quite remember, because we haven't captured it. And this is where, with a coaching lens, it's something that I always encourage people to reflect on in the moment. Something that I tend to do, I keep a diary, and it's not one of these expanding my life, it's bullet points. How did the day go? What was a key thing that happened? For those who may do this at home, we try at dinner time to say, what were the 3 things you were grateful for today? A bit of mental health and well-being, and when you've got a son who's being homeschooled by his dad, he may want to tell mummy all about how badly it's gone, or he may want to reflect on all the good things that have happened. But it's those reflections that we do it as a family, and there's nothing to stop us from doing it in the business context. Because if you reflect now, you can then provide some real insights as to what has and hasn't gone well. It was a key thing within the military. We were trained, you train hard, fight easy. And so what they would do with us is they would put us through effectively live scenarios where they would say, right, okay, this is a simulated enemy. This is your team. How are you going to react to the situations? And at the end of these scenarios, and they could last half a day, they could last for 4 weeks. And in the really large ones, it was like an enormous laser tag setup where they would have big laser zone style kit that you'd all be wearing. You'd be driving around in the prairies of Canada with laser tanks and all of this stuff. And it was all simulating effectively what would happen in combat. And at the end, there'd be an enormous screening. You'd all sit down and there'd be 250 if you were running as a squadron, or it could be 6,000 if you were running it as a battle group or whatever. And you reflect on all of the actions that people took. And the whole point was you could then say, right, okay, why were you making those decisions? Why did you do that? That move cost you 100 people's lives in simulation. Why did you do it? And by questioning and reflecting on it, you could learn from your mistakes. And we do it when we're kids and we teach it as adults to our children. There's nothing different about how we do it now in business. And I think the sooner you start reflecting, the better. But make sure you do something with that. So if you're taking all of those notes, what you then need to do is bring your team in. So start thinking about, when was the last time you reflected on how things have been going with your team? If you're putting that time in the diary now, fantastic. If you're not, start lining up these times. It could be just you with your key team. It could be you with the key techs in your side. Or it could be actually getting together as a whole group, 2 weeks time, saying, right, okay, we're all going to come together. We can do it virtually. Let's get some honest feedback and let's work out where we want to go.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, motivation is actually another kind of key thing that's front of mind during this COVID experience, because not only the leaders need to stay motivated, but leaders need to motivate their staff as well. And I know you've got some instances where you've had to motivate you know, your troops on the combat field, but how do you drive, particularly now, drive and inspire employee engagement and that motivation?
Yeah, and it's a challenge, and it's not easy. And I'd love to say there's an easy solution, but there isn't. I think one of the things that I have found that has worked well both within the military, but also within the corporate world, is giving people ownership. I think one of the challenges that I've found working with some executives in the current environment is it's a case of, right, we've been hit by this catastrophe. All of a sudden, we want to start micromanaging, or we want to say, right, okay, stop what you're doing. We need to reassess and everything. And the challenge is you then take away your strongest asset, which is your teams who know how to do their job and have actually, up until this point, been going quite well. So the moment you start trying to restrict that or tell them, hey, here's some top tips on how to do things, there's nothing wrong with providing background support. But if you're trying to over-engineer situations or take over the conversation, you really impact upon how successfully teams are able to effectively execute what they need to do. So giving them some ownership and letting them be themselves, because it's going to inspire them. They know how to do their jobs and they're able to continue doing their job. Yes, it may be a different scenario. The meetings are now all virtual, but it doesn't stop them from having the meetings they would normally have. If every 10 minutes you want to give them an update on what's going on, it's just going to interfere with how they're doing their everyday life, and it will frustrate and it will stifle that motivation that they've got. There's a reason why you have these people on your payroll, and there's a reason why you've let them do what they do. So let them be able to actually undertake their role and try to minimize how much you're disrupting. Another part, I think, is decision-making and involvement. Acknowledging it is a challenging time and acknowledging that there are a number of differences that are going on. Make sure that you're actually reaching out to your people and letting them know either what's going on or getting their feedback on what you would like them to see or what involvement they would like to have in what's happening. Because there will be big decisions that you may need to make in this current environment. But normally you would have a team meeting because everyone's out on the floor and you're just like, right, okay, conference room, 15 minutes, we're just going to chat about this. There's a real risk in this environment where you think to yourself, oh, I don't want to give Kev a call about this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a decision based upon what I think is going on. So don't be afraid to actually reach out and involve them in the decision making. Yes, they are doing their jobs. Yes, you're trying to leave them alone and minimize that disruption. But if it's going to be a disruption, make sure it's a good one and there's a good reason for it, because it's really key and it's really critical. And I think that having seen what it can be like, if you are motivating teams when they are cold and wet and tired, out in the field, we could go days without sleep, and it would be hard work, and the environment was constantly changing. And so the way that we would involve people was by saying, right, okay, these are the options that are available to us. Okay, this is what I think is the strongest option. Let me know your thoughts, because it's going to impact the whole team. It's exactly the same in the corporate industry, where you're saying, right, okay, these things are happening. Our environment is changing daily. These are the impacts we could have. It could be that we're looking to reduce the amount of working week that is available to staff and saying, right, okay, if we all suffer a little, then no one will have to suffer a lot. And it's a cliched example that Simon Sinek has talked a lot around, but it's saying things like this where you say, right, okay, making sure that people are involved, they feel part of the team. Yes, they're isolated at home, but at the same time, they're still part of the decision making. They are still part of your organisation. So don't be afraid to incorporate them and keep them inspired and motivated. They are critical. They were critical before this happened. They will be critical after this happens. They will help you rebuild your industry. So ensure that they are taken on the journey with you. And I think the final point is just this transparency. Don't be afraid to share. Don't be afraid to give some insights. It doesn't necessarily have to be decision making. It could just be a case of, this is what's going on. These are the challenges. From personal experience, my wife set up a health practice 18 months ago. And it's the classic where things were going quite well and you're slowly building your industry, and then all of a sudden 2 months ago people are not coming in, and you're in a position where we have finance to set up this business, and things were going well, and all the projections that you work out have been thrown out the window. And she actually sat down with her team on week 2 and said, right, please understand, this is our situation. It's not a great situation. I can't lie and say it is. It's going to be challenging. We don't know how long this will last for. But by providing that insight, it built a lot of relationships with her team, who up until that point had just been turning up and taking a wage. They suddenly realised that it's no longer just a brand, and actually there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So don't be afraid to be transparent and share the challenges. I share the challenges of homeschooling with my team. I'm trying to work 4 days a week from 8 till 6, and I have a 9-year-old who is in school from 9 till 2 apparently, and it's very challenging, so don't be afraid to share that.
We've got an anonymous question that's come in relation to sort of inspiring employees, I suppose. The question is, what happens if my staff don't want to come back to the office environment now that they've experienced working from home? Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's interestingly, it's something that's coming up more and more, and it's one way of saying, right, okay, well, ask yourself the question, is that a problem? Because it may not be. It may be a massive impact, and it may really impact on how you work as a team. But we've demonstrated that it's quite possible now for us to maintain communication with everybody in a virtual world. And it could be that these individuals are saying, right, okay, I don't want to come into the office. Now, depending on the reasons, they may be completely valid. It may actually save them an hour's worth of travel a day. There may be financial implications. One of the key things is, don't be afraid as a leader to turn around and say, look, I respect where you're coming from, and that may work. You could work on a 2-3 days a week, you're working from home, and there's people that I work with who are based up on the Sunshine Coast when I'm down in Brisbane, and they will spend 3 days on the sunny coast, and then they will come into the office twice a week. And looking at something like that is quite feasible, of saying, right, okay, I appreciate where you're coming from, but there is an expectation that every Tuesday is a home office day, or it could be that actually we want everybody in the office on Thursdays, and provide those options. Now, depending on your industry, depends on how easy that is to do. I can guarantee you that as a coach, I much prefer being face-to-face with people, but not everybody wants that. So you have to adapt. But I think that the real challenge you've got is that this is here to stay. We are now a virtual organisation. I'm about to start coaching clients in the US, and the challenges that provides with time zones. So depending on your business, don't be afraid to have the conversation of saying, right, okay, is this feasible? How much are you prepared to accept in terms of that flexibility as an organisation?
Yeah, excellent. This might be another good segue to have our second poll. Actually, we've got another question that we'd like to ask, and it's about what your biggest concern is leading teams in this environment. So there'll be another series of questions. I think there's about 8 questions will come up on your screen now. So if you can, 30 seconds, just quickly choose what that is. You know, is your biggest concern staying motivated, cultural issues, mental well-being, communicating, managing, challenging staff, the pressure of the whole situation at the moment, delivering bad news. There would have been a lot of, you know, stand downs and potential redundancies that would have happened over the last kind of 6-7 weeks. But yeah, so interested to hear what your thoughts are on that, and depending on what the results are, we can yeah, perhaps you can lend some lens to that, William. But we'll close it off in about 10 seconds, I would say.
Yeah, we've still got some results coming in here. So I've got 70% of people that have voted. So we'll give it another 15 seconds or so. It's probably worth commenting that at Advantage, historically, we've been able to work from home 1 day a week without approval in the past. That's since been moved to 3 days a week now without approval, because it's worked so effectively throughout the COVID period. So I guess that's a live example of how we've adapted our working from home policy due to the success of that.
And it certainly kind of brings that trust factor to the fore, doesn't it? Like, I guess at the start of this whole isolation, a lot of leaders might think, oh, geez, can I trust employees to do the right thing at home? But, you know, I can speak for myself that we've got, you know, over 100% trust in our staff, that they're autonomous, they're self-motivating. And yeah, it's really interesting to see. I'm not surprised at it, but it's just tested that kind of element of, you know, culture really, and trust. So, yeah, so I don't know if me.
Yeah, we'll end that poll now. So 80% of you voted, so thanks for that. So the top concern from you all is staying motivated. So 37% of people staying motivated is the main concern, followed by managing challenging staff and challenging conversations at 23%. The rest of the results are relatively even, with 10% or so of you saying that's your main concern. But yeah, so definitely staying motivated and managing challenging staff are the top two.
Excellent. Well, there's I guess there's one, I guess, final question which would be good to look at, William, is that, well, actually a couple of questions, but you know, people look to leaders for guidance. You know, however, how do we, or who should we, or who should give leaders guidance? I know, you know, it's good to surround yourself by people who you trust, but you know, who should leaders look to ride shoulder to shoulder with?
And just tying into that, Will, we've just got a question that kind of relates to that. It's more a comment, but I feel like I'm managing and leading well. How do I know if I actually am?
Yeah, no, and it does tie in quite well. So I think that to pick up the question, Megan, it's one where ask your teams, ask for some open and honest feedback, and it links into the previous one regarding an element of transparency. But don't be afraid to hold some open sessions, and it could be that you want to look at a tool for some 360 feedbacks. There's plenty of tools out there. It could be actually, depending on the relationships you've got with your teams, you just want to have that open conversation with them, and just say, okay, we're going to have a bit of a round table. Really keen to know how people are going, or what their thoughts are of how my leadership style is going. Because I think from a guidance perspective, there are lots of different sources that as leaders we can access guidance from. And it will depend on the environment, and that is one. So if you're testing how you think you're doing as a leader, ask your people, because they will be able to give you that real insight. And it's the joys of reflection, opportunities to turn around and say, great, okay, this is what you're doing really well, and this is what you're not doing so well. And this is where, to Kev's point regarding trust, if you are prepared to put yourself out there and be open and honest, then you do build trust, because they know that they can comfortably talk to you around things and get some great feedback without fear of judgment or backlash. And that's where it's has to be really well controlled how you open and ask for it. But I think other areas where you can get guidance, depending on what kind of guidance you want or what kind of guidance you're looking for, there's lots of different sources. You're going to have your peers And by that, it could be your work colleagues, but it could also be your friends, people who you have worked with for a long time, or have previously worked with, friends who you know will be quite open and honest about either the way that they've seen you interacting or behaving, or how they have interpreted a change in you, depending on what kind of relationships you have with friends. Some of you will be catching up with mates on Zoom or FaceTime every week for a drink. Some of you won't. So if you're not, then maybe it's the family that you've got around you. It could be that actually your partner, who has a bloody good idea as to how you will change, can give you some insights. I know that being married to a business owner and seeing the stress that she goes through, we will have debriefs on some nights as just venting and saying, right, okay, am I doing everything right? These are all the things I'm trying to do. Give me some open and honest feedback as to what you think I could do better. Because these are the people that you live with every single day, and they will notice the changes. My wife noticed a change when I was dropping off from a motivation point. She could tell that I was less motivated because my routine, normally I was up at 6 every morning for a run, then I'd take the dogs out for a walk, and I was doing rugby coaching twice a week. All of that stopped because all of a sudden I wasn't going to get up for a morning walk, because we would take the dogs for a walk as a family in the afternoon. And then the family walk would drop off and it starts snowballing. So looking to those people who know you and know your habits, because things like that are really key. Your own mental well-being will determine how well you stay motivated. And it's a challenge. There are plenty of industry experts out there, and there will be people in your field from an industry point of view who you can reach out to for guidance, and saying, right, okay, these are some of the ideas I'm looking at for my business. Depending on who you're talking to will depend on how much you want to share, but there's no harm in just actually sharing some of these ideas. And we're seeing it a lot where politics and unions and all these other industries are now starting to align a lot more, because they know it's challenging times, and so they're wanting to share better practice. Having formerly worked in the safety industry, it was a key thing. We would always reach out to other safety professionals, because you weren't trying to one-up one another. You were trying to ensure that all environments were as safe as possible. So reaching out to people who are in your industry and can provide you some of that insight would be really great. There's obviously the professional component of coaches. So it may be that you have a coach, and you can reflect on different things. I work on both personal and professional reflection. Some people want to develop their personal skills, others want to develop professional. So reaching out to coaches, or if you have someone who is a coach who can support you in that, then don't be afraid to look after it. And then finally, I would say self. You know yourself better than anybody else. You will know if you are not on form, if you're not sleeping as well, if your diet shot to pieces, if you enjoy more alcohol because you can't go out, so you might as well have one beer every night and that becomes 5. Don't be afraid to do reflection. It does go back to this early point of actually reviewing how your day has gone. If you've had a really crappy day, compare it to previous crappy days pre-COVID. How would you handle that? How would you detox yourself? Are you reading in the evenings and you don't normally? Are you watching TV far more than you used to? Don't be afraid to turn around and look at yourself and say, I can see a deterioration in how I'm going, and what do I need to do about that? So,
yeah, great. Well, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I'll be interested in your thoughts on what the future looks like, and is this the new norm that we're in?
And I think we've touched on parts of it. This is definitely an element of this will always be here to stay. Interestingly, if you look at the major advances in society or major advances in human evolution, it's off the back of a key event. So World War II spiraled and sped up loads of things. Pandemics like this have a real impact. If you look at how quickly countries like China responded to turning into this world of drone operated systems, all of a sudden things that were ideas now become a reality, because you need to make them happen. If you look at the wealth of Amazon has gone bananas, with Jeff Bezos now hitting $1 trillion or being worth $1 trillion or whatever it is. Enormous amount of money because of the success of how they have been able to adapt. And so it's then saying, with your own line of industry, what are you looking at? What do you need to do to be able to respond to this? Because the reality is that pandemics now will continue to crop up. They may not be as severe, but we live in a global enterprise and we've seen how quickly it can spread. I know that the research on South Korea said that the first 30 people who were infected were absolutely fine because they all self-isolated. The 31st went and infected 6,000 other people. So we live in this world now where it's very easy to spread these things. We need to ensure that we can react to it. So as part of your strategies, as part of the reflection that you're doing moving forward, don't be afraid to say, right, okay, what is the new norm? Does it mean that, like Vantage has done, you can turn around and say, right, okay, you can have 3 days of working from home. Providing there is the trust and the ability to demonstrate your results, there should be nothing that stops that. And it can lead to some really good cost savings from floor and real estate and elements like that. So it's then saying, right, okay, what can this do to support my business? But you need to stay positive. Growth mindset, as leaders, we need to inspire others. If you just completely reflect and say, oh God, this was rubbish, let's just hope it doesn't happen again, then you're really going to struggle. Your people will look to you now and as you go back to work. What are we doing to ensure that we don't get slammed as badly next time? Do you need to build up a bit of a war chest so that you can scale things accordingly? And how would that work? So don't be afraid to say, what does the future look like? It looks like what it is now, just with a slightly different lens, okay? And I, as a leader, will ensure that I take a positive approach into this.
Yep, right. Well, thanks for that. And that's, I guess that's probably the formal kind of presentation part of it, but I might hand back to Megan Stewart now, who's been our moderator, just to run through any questions, if there has been during the session.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin and William. So we'll go ahead and have some question time now. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes for this. So we'll go through the questions that we haven't answered that have been asked throughout the session to start with. But if you've got any further questions, please use the question and answer function at the bottom of your Zoom control panel, and we'll go through them as we come in. But so to get started, we've got a question from Ethan Hill asking whether offices are still important for teams and small businesses coming back from COVID-19.
I would say that they have their place. It's just how well you use them. I think that nothing will be an adequate substitute for actual people interacting. We feel good about it when we're hanging out with friends. We are, by nature, a species that enjoys social interaction. So I think that the workplace is somewhere that you can have that. What your workplace looks like, it may change. It may be that you are in this Google world now where we don't have to have formalized desks, and it can be much more of the hot desking setup, or there's a handful of tables and it becomes more of a social setup. I work with a lot of startups, and it's very much a case now of they tend to have a communal eating area. And then there's a variety of desks that vary between kind of like standing and sitting and beanbags and everything, because the workforce is different and it evolves. So I think that the workplace or the meeting room does have a place. It's how well you operate and how you use it, whether or not it's more collaborative, whether or not it needs to remain structured. And it may be that your industry works well in that space. But I think that as part of looking what the future looks like, how easily can you downscale? How easily can you get people to step away? And therefore, when they are back in the office, how are you making it something that they want to come back to?
Just to add to that point, I think, yeah, there's always going to be an element of office culture and whatnot. I think advantage here. So we're here on a Monday and a Friday, at least people are in the office just from to have that conversation at the water cooler and just to continue that culture going, and then out on site during the week. But yeah, it's going to be a mixture of the hot desking potentially, and but yeah, there's still going to be that element. I can see that we need human interaction. We need to have face to face. So that's still going to continue.
Great. We've got another question from the session. So it's an anonymous question. It's an interesting one. Would there be any hidden stresses impacting me that I'm not aware of? How would I know? And what should leaders be doing to keep on top of any hidden stresses?
Kev, I'll have a go at this one, but feel free to jump in. I think from a coaching perspective and also from a personal perspective. So I, for context, at the end of 2016, had a mental breakdown. So it was a combination of personal factors. It was leftover PTSD issues, challenges at work, challenges at home. So lots and lots of things that basically it was known as the perfect Swiss cheese, where all the problems all lined up at once. So I then went through about 18 months of rebuilding myself. And in that, it was one of those where I spent a lot of time looking at situations and reflecting more often than I'd ever done before. And this is why I touched on reflection quite a bit throughout the talk, because the reality was I had always just compartmentalized things and said, oh, okay, well, this has happened. It's fine. I've got through it. I'll put it over there. I'll be okay. And just kept going. And that's often what we can do. We go into defensive mode and it's a case of, right, there's a crisis on. I'm a team leader. I need to inspire. On reflection, was it a good idea that having led an enormous team in combat operations, I then went home and told my wife, yeah, it was fine. It was just a job and I just did what I needed to. The fact that you're getting shot at every single day, the fact that we went 2 days without food, the fact that I went 5 days without sleep, they're not normal things. Whether or not my wife was the one who needed to know about them, that's irrelevant. It was more the fact that I should have been talking about these things. So don't be afraid to reflect on what you're going through and getting some open and honest feedback from people you trust, either professionally or personally, to say, right, how am I going? How do you think things are going? And it could be that one of them turns around and says, hey, are you okay? Because I've noticed that your company has just taken an enormous hit, or you have just had a really stressful situation. I think that we're seeing a lot around domestic violence and the impacts of mental health as a society. And it's not saying necessarily that anyone on this call is being impacted by it, but it can have a hidden stressor that we're not aware of because it's different. It's not something we've done before. When was the last time you went this long without interacting with other people other than your partners or your family? And some of you may be in complete isolation. So I think it's one of reflecting and not being afraid to write down things that may be slightly different than what you're used to and chatting about them, or reaching out or Googling them, or without going down the Google MD web setup. It's more a case of saying, right, okay, is this normal? There's nothing wrong with feeling rubbish. And I think that's one of the things that I've done a lot of coaching on. It's okay sometimes just to hate the day or hate the situation because it is rubbish. But don't be afraid to actually be honest about it to yourself and don't lie to yourself or to others when you are trying to give that open and honest feedback.
Yeah, no, just to pick up on a couple of points there, William, I think, yeah, having that trusted network of people around you, they're the people who are going to pick up on whether or not, you know, you've got some hidden stresses or not. I know plenty of times that I'm stressed, I don't know it, but my wife or my mum or whoever it might be will go, hey, what's going on? So then that kind of sparks that reflection, and then that kind of leads you down a whole other path. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's another day, and it's, you know, the worry that you've been stressing over is really not, you know, what's worth stressing over really. That can't be solved through a network of people around you. So yeah, to you, Megan.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of what you've spoken about there, I guess, is about reflecting and investing in yourself and that sort of things, which ties in with one of the questions we've got here. So the question is, how would you go about convincing peers that active leadership is very valuable in the overall success of a team, and that it's therefore worth the time and investment? They've commented that unfortunately not everyone is necessarily on board with that.
It's a challenging one. And I think one of the things that I was taught very early particularly in the leadership world, and this goes right back to when I left university. I spent a year at the military academy, and they teach you about leadership. It's a very privileged experience because you spend 1 year just learning how to be a leader, and they are open and honest with you. And one of the things they share with you is that not everyone gets it, and not everyone ever will get it. And it's not to say that in the example that's been provided that those people in the team can't get it. Some people just don't see the benefit. And it could be from past experiences, it could be the demographic, it could be that older people have a view that they know better, it could be that younger people have a view that they know better, and what would you know as an old fart? At the age of 39, it's always fun when you're chatting to people in your team who are 19 and they're reflecting on all these things that were happening or that they are going through, and I have no idea how difficult it is, and how quickly you can age out of that position. So I think that active leadership, it's one way you just have to acknowledge that either some people won't get it, but others, it's an opportunity to say, reflect on those leaders who you have seen who have been inspiring. One of the big things when I'm teaching leadership in workshops, I ask participants to reflect on one good leader and one bad leader that they have had throughout their lives. And it could be that it's in a sporting world when they were at school, it could be a teacher, it could be their 15th boss that they've had. There's always going to be somebody who you will always remember as being really, really good, and those ones who are really, really bad. Now, asking them to reflect on what was good about the leadership style is a real challenge, because good leaders just make it look easy and they make it look good, and you can't really put your finger on it. Bad leaders, however, you can point out every single flaw with them very, very easily because of the fact you're just like, well, I hate the way that they talk to me, or it really annoys me the way that they're always commanding the situation. They don't give me any autonomy. They're never here on time. They set a really bad example. So bad leaders are a really good example of what not to do in the leadership space. And from an active leadership perspective, it's then saying, right, okay, looking at this, what kind of leader do you want to be? What kind of leader are you going to be that's going to inspire others? Because bad leaders will always be remembered for all of those frustrations. I could name the 3 worst team leaders that I have ever had. 2 were military and 1 was in professional services. And I could name you my top 3 leaders, and I could never really tell you exactly what was great about them. But the bad leaders, it's very, very easy. And I often reflect on them. And that's the challenge you have. If you can get people to understand and reflect on their own experiences of leadership, what is it that made you feel good, or what is it that made you feel bad? Because that's how they learn. That's how they can see the benefits. You trying to impart your own experience is a real challenge. If I was to ask you, Megan, what you thought about, or what was your most memorable childhood experience, you would be able to remember it, and it would be something that is personal to you. If I told you mine, it may be a good story for the next 2 days, but you'd have forgotten about it by the next time we catch up. So getting people to reflect on their own experiences of what a good leader or a bad leader is a great way to get them to actually fully appreciate it. Kev, your thoughts?
Oh man, I think you've covered it off there. That's yeah, nothing further to add to that one.
We've got time for one last question. So lastly, again, it's anonymous. They've commented that personally they feel that the real impact won't hit for another 6 months or so. So that's obviously on the back of all the government incentives dripping off at that time, etc. But they've asked, without knowing exactly what the future holds, what and how should leaders be thinking about and preparing themselves and their teams for?
I think that the answer is already in that question. I think to an extent, it's just continually thinking. What are they thinking about? Just keep thinking. Don't be afraid to say, right, okay, let's keep reflecting on the situation. Let's keep planning. Let's acknowledge that we are a flexible workforce that will adjust to whatever challenges may be coming up. And what does that look like? Well, no one really knows, but we can start hazarding some of the guesses and saying, okay, if we go back to the early points, what do you think about now as a leader? Our team. If we can maintain team cohesion, then you're going to prepare the team to weather whatever storm is going to hit. And it could be acknowledging and being open and transparent and saying, right, we may not be through the worst of this just yet. So we need to acknowledge that there could be an impact in 6 months' time. If you can see things, if you are experiencing things as individuals, please reach out and let me know. Share with the rest of the team, because they are going to all of a sudden be more people on the ground getting insights for you and helping you in how you make those decisions. Your contingency planning is acknowledging that it's a different environment and there will be plenty more changes that could come. But the reality is that was always the nature of business. Business will never stay the same. The moment you stop evolving is the moment you become obsolete. So you need to just continue thinking about it and saying, right, okay, what were the really good things? Looking at that reflection point, what were the really good things that we can take away about the experience that we've just gone through, good and bad? What do we want to do well moving forward? What do we not want to do again? And how do we ensure we don't do it? So that when that next change hits, and who knows what that change could be, when it does hit, we're at least thinking about it and we're prepared for it and we are ready to adapt. And if it's a case of another spike, how quickly can everyone go virtual? How quickly can everyone step away from the office? We've done it once before. It shouldn't be what happened this time, which seemed to be 2 weeks of everyone going into chaos stage. We don't know what's happening. Oh my God, this is really chaotic. How do we do this? We've done that. We've evolved. We've learned from it. Let's hand out a check sheet. Let's come up with the best top tip ideas from our business as to how we will manage something like this again, because something else is going to happen. It could be bushfires. It could be another flood. It could be storms. We live in Queensland, as beautiful as it is. There's plenty that likes to upset us every now and again. So don't be afraid to continually think and continually have that growth mindset.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is, I mean, COVID-19 and the bushfires before this and the flooding, they're kind of very good stress tests on businesses. And I think this is a good opportunity to look at of those areas that you need resilience in your business, whether it's corporate governance or sales effectiveness or working capital management or discovering your why, or whatever it may be. Now is the time to self-assess, right? Where am I weak in some of those areas, and what do I need to focus on to make sure that we can weather any future disruptions in the future. So now is probably an ideal time to actually look at that.
Great. Thanks everybody for your questions. There's a couple of questions that we haven't had a chance to answer live, so we'll just loop back directly to those people and answer them privately. But I'll just hand back over to Kevin to close out.
Yeah, well, great. And thank you, everyone. We appreciate you all being here. In the coming weeks, we'll also be doing a few more webinars. We'll be discussing business intelligence, so ensuring your organization stays at the forefront of digital best practice, onshoring, very topical at the moment, how and why we should do that, and have a look at supply chain, so reducing costs through better procurement, just to name a few. So if you get any further questions, just please feel free to contact us directly at Vantage Performance. You'll receive an email tomorrow, my contact details. Don't forget to check out our podcasts, many podcasts that are done via our website or SoundCloud. And thanks again to William. Thanks, Megan, for moderating. And thanks for joining us today. And we'll see you next time.